Hi, I'm Chris Overstreet, and I have opinions. Last week we did actually get a vote through Congress and actually signed by Trump that the Epstein files are going to be fully disclosed. But the thing is, the bill that actually passed and got signed by Donald Trump exempts any record which is being used in an active investigation or which might harm national security. And that is a powerful 1-2 punch that will make sure that nothing about Donald Trump comes out of this. To make things even better, today it was announced that as part of the Epstein investigation, both Bill and Hillary Clinton have been called in for further questioning. So yeah, active investigations plus the fact that anything associated with the president is going to be treated as national security means I stand by my earlier prediction. So long as the Republican is in control of the White House, we will not see anything come out of the Epstein files that touches Donald Trump. But even this bill, with this gigantic double-barreled loophole, was so scary to certain conservatives that they've already come out trying to make defenses. For example, Megyn Kelly, the talking head on Fox News, came out and said that 15-year-olds count as being legal. Not in most states, by the way. In most states, the legal age of consent is 16, and even then, only with other people within about 5 years age of the person in question. And even so, 15 is still a child. So not that big not really a distinction with a difference, is what I'm trying to say. And to make things even better, there's some people coming out with shit like this. Basically confessing to robbing the cradle, as if this will defend Donald Trump or whoever else. What the hell? Well, I'm going to explain what the hell. It all comes down to a magic word, and that magic word is consent. And conservatives do not understand consent. Here's why. In our society, and in particular in our marketplace, a consent between equals is the foundation of free enterprise. I'm not going to say capitalism. I'm not going to say free enterprise. They are two different things. Maybe I'll do a video about that some other time. But in free enterprise, in a free market, you say, I want to buy this thing. And the other person says, here's the information about this thing. Here's my price. You come to an agreement. You shake hands. Exchange. Everybody's happy. The problem is, in our quote-unquote free market, the seller does not necessarily feel obliged to give you all the information you need. And unfortunately, our society, especially here in the United States, says that if you don't do your due diligence, if the other guy scams you, it's your fault. Which goes a long way to explain why conservatives say very little about all the many fraudsters that Donald Trump has pardoned. Usually with the bribe right out in the open. Now, this same thing applies to sex as well. The whole idea is, one person says, I want to have sex with you. The other person says, I want to have sex with you. All good, provided they're equals. But if somebody has more power or more information than the other person, they can trick them or coerce them into having sex, causing untold damage, because sex is an act in which humans are at our most vulnerable. Not just emotionally, but physically. The portions of the body that are used in the sexual act are among the most sensitive and easily damaged in the entire body. And so what happens when one person has a lot of power over another person? For example, to take one of the biggest cliches of the 20th century, the boss getting it on with the secretary. Yeah. Hey, gal, give it up or you're fired. How free is that secretary to say no? And here's the thing. In a situation where one party has more power over the other, a yes is meaningless if the person can't say no. If the person can't say no, then they can't say yes either, because it's of no value. To give you a more explicit description, Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. Thomas Jefferson first got together with Sally Hemings when Sally was, I believe, 14. And Sally made a negotiation with him. She said, I'll let you do this, as if a slave had any choice. I'll let you do this on the condition that if I have any kids, you free them. And to give credit, Thomas Jefferson did free all 4 of the children that he had with Sally Hemings. They were the only slaves he ever freed. But in the end analysis, Sally Hemings still really didn't have a choice. She was negotiating with no cards in her hand. If Thomas Jefferson had out and out raped her, she would have had no recourse, and the society of the time would not even have blinked. I mean, there was a minor scandal when it came out, and Thomas Jefferson had to deny it to Helen Gone that, no, I'm not having sex with this woman, Sally Hemings. But it was a 9 days wonder and then gone. Or let's give a more potent example. Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton. Both these people insisted that their affair was purely consensual. In fact, Lewinsky, I believe, was the one that came on to Bill Clinton first. But here's the thing. Monica Lewinsky was an unpaid intern at the White House, the lowest possible rung on the totem pole. And William Jefferson Clinton was the most powerful man on earth at the time. How in the hell could either side prove that there wasn't coercion there? And for that matter, how many other interns gave it up to Bill and the word never got out about it, simply because nobody was looking for it at the time? Now let's take this to kids. I mentioned earlier that in most states, the age of consent is 16 if with someone else about 5 years, within 5 years of the same age. For example, 22 to 16 is no-go, that's statutory rape. 20 to 16 is legally okay. Otherwise, the age of consent is 18. There are a few exceptions. But why is this? Because young people do not have the knowledge base necessary to be an equal negotiating partner in this. They don't know about the dangers of sex. And I'm not talking about sexual education, which really, if you're in an abstinence-only state, it doesn't work with a damn anyway. They're also not capable of judging the hazards. Teenagers, the part of their brain that judges risk hasn't grown in yet. Believe me, when I was a teenager, and I did have a little bit of teenage sex, and I'm not going to talk about it any further than that, except to say, I was fucking stupid. Yeah. The part that says this is a bad idea is very, very, very tiny voice, drowned out by a whole bunch of hormones saying, I wanna. And then, on the other side of the scales, we have a culture that practically since forever has worshipped youth and has held up the idea of young girlhood as being the epitome of sexual appeal. Even today, there is so much orientation towards the quote-unquote barely legal type of sexual activity, and that has actually come down. Back when I was a little kid and then a teenager, sex comedies that were focused on high school were all the rage. High school or early college, basically you're talking about 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, and yeah, topless, sex, etc. Yeah, bear in mind they made 3 Porky's movies. Yeah, think about that for a minute. That's where we were 40 years ago, and it's not that far off at all from where we are now. This is why, to go back to our where was it here? Here we go. Christopher Aldana, I would not have owned up to this on the internet, friend. At age 22, as a first-year teacher, I engaged in a consensual encounter with a 16-year-old who was not my student. There was no force, coercion, or predatory intent. Because I was employed as a teacher, the conduct was classified as a Tier 3 sex offense and requires lifetime sex offender registry placement. Yeah, issues here. 1, if you're a teacher at all, that gives you automatic authority over children even if they're not your students. And this also applies to college, because in college, if you're a teacher, you can get a person kicked out of the university, or you can bomb their grades. You have power of coercion over the other person. That is a mismatch of power that makes consent impossible. Even if the two of you agree with it, you can't prove that you didn't coerce them. And the other person can't prove that they weren't coerced. That's why teachers are universally banned from sexual fraternization with their students, whether or not they're underage. Because it is a power gap that is just begging to be abused, and historically, abuse is the way you should have bet. It's practically guaranteed it would be abused. But even if it's not a teacher, in our culture, any adult is considered, by default, to have authority to order around a kid. You don't have the same level of authority as a parent does, but you still have enough authority to where you could potentially coerce a kid, or at least have enough authority to where you could basically sweet talk them into doing something that they'll regret for the rest of their lives. When the age gap is too great, and especially if the person is under the age of adulthood, there is no way to prove that it was consensual, because the younger person was not mentally capable of consent. Now, that's why we have all these issues about age of consent, while we have issues about non-fraternization in the military with people of lower rank, non-fraternization in corporate offices, etc., etc., because power mismatches will be abused. And this is why, in particular, church organizations are among the greatest sources of sexual abuse and child rape in the world. Because how much bigger a power gap can you create than one person saying, God is on my side. I speak for God. And God wants you to do that thing with the mouth again to me. Yeah. Now, having explained that, why do conservatives in particular have this big a problem? Conservatives don't believe in consent. Conservatives believe, to be perfectly blunt, that females are property, that children are property. The only reason that they oppose child porn and child rape is because, ew, that's icky. That might be my kid. No, no, no. Unless they're the one doing it. A female in a conservative society is owned by her father until such time as she is married, at which point she becomes the property of the husband. That's the attitude. That's the religious attitude. That's been the cultural attitude for ages. That's why we have things like dowries in the old books. And before you tell me that this is modern times and that's no longer the case, bear in mind that the Republican Party right now has shot down multiple efforts in multiple states to end laws that allow marriage as early as 13 years old. That's right. In several states, you can get married as young as 14, but you can't get divorced until you're 21. Think about that. One final note. It took me a very long time to come around to this point of view because I'm part of this culture as much as anybody else, and I was raised in particular in a rural conservative culture. One of my great-grandparents, my father's father's mother, was 13 years old when she got married and 14 years old when she had her first kid. And for ages, I thought that was normal because there was historical precedent. It's not. It very much is not. It is damaging. It is unfair. It is wrong. Even if Jeffrey Epstein's bunch were teenagers who were fully consenting, and A, we're not 100% sure they were all teenagers, and B, we know for a fucking fact very few of them were consenting. He was a trafficker who kept slaves for sex. But even if it was, if they said, yeah, I'm good with it, these were 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old young women being macked on by 40, 50, 60-year-old, very rich and powerful men with legal impunity. No, it wasn't any better. Yes, it was still child rape. And yes, anyone who the Epstein files fingers as being part of it needs to go to prison, including Bill Clinton, if he's on the list, and especially including Donald Trump, if he's on the list. I'm Chris Overstreet, and I have opinions.